What is your relationship to commitment? What is your relationship to staying? Do you have a runner in you? Are you in self-trust? Do you believe that you are lovable? Do you believe that somebody could actually choose you? And are you attracted to healthy love? Or is your nervous system wired to get excited and roused from chaos or avoidance or emotional unavailability or conflict? So taking it home to yourself first is really that paramount step. Having that self-awareness, because if you know yourself, again, you have that self-trust, you understand your own patterns, you understand your own wiring, you understand what triggers you and what your shadow fantasy is. You know, if you want to run away and go live in the mountains alone every time you get triggered, then you might be able to notice that when you're feeling activated in relationship. And instead of running away, you can bring your vulnerability to your partner.
Greetings and welcome to the Dr. Espen podcast. I am your host, Espen. Today I'm joined by Sheleana Aiyana. She's the founder of Rising Woman, a global community with over 3 million readers dedicated to healing, self-discovery, and conscious relationships. She's a best-selling author. Sheleana's work, or Shay's work, is informed by her training in somatic healing, which is something that I would like to cover today as how do we get into the body and move the body and get into some of what I call the issues in the tissues for that kind of deep somatic healing work. Also self-discovery and conscious relationships. She's an international best-selling author, and Shay's work is informed by her work, furthermore, as a mother, as a wife, and her transformative life experiences as well. She's a writer. She's done a lot of work into the deeper intimacy, including self-awareness and connection to the natural world, inspiring people, and mostly women, to heal the old wounds and cultivate love in all areas of life. This is going to be a beautiful conversation, and I believe it'll have a lot to do with coming home to the self. So, Shay, how are you today?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing great. I'm enjoying the sunshine where my family and I are enjoying Mexico for the winter.
Beautiful. You got a little 2-year-old. We were having a quick conversation there before. Isn't it such a special journey as well?
Oh my gosh, it's such a roller coaster of hilarious chaos.
Yeah, I think it's a great reminder for myself to know that we have a lot to learn from the children, not just the other way around.
Oh my gosh, it's mostly learning from them and from her. They're so pure, so total, so innocent, and such reflectors too. It's such a dynamic reflection moment to moment. So I really learn a lot from her every day.
It's divine. As I shared briefly, I've got a 6-year-old son, and I recall when I became a father, I thought my heart was open until I had a child, and then I realized there was a whole new dimension of love available here. So it's a really special conversation, just parenthood in itself. But today I want to talk specifically about conscious relationships. And I think as we go through this transition from potentially more unintegrated relationships in the earlier periods of life, and as we evolve through life, I believe, and from experience, have seen a lot of people now do a lot of self-work, healing work, because we realize that potentially what we attract is dependent on ourselves and the work that we've done ourselves. I know you're very instrumental in this. Can you tell me first, what is your definition of a conscious relationship? And if someone wants to potentially open up their hearts even more to learn to love, both to give and receive more, what are some of the steps that some might take to deepen our conscious relationships?
In conscious relationship, in my book, I have this circle and it sort of shows the arc of conscious relationship as this cyclical thing. It's the relationship between you, between nature, between spirit, right? So it's this relationship that isn't just about your relationship with other. It's also about the relationship you have to yourself. It's the relationship that you have to whatever higher power. It's relationship to the earth. And then it's relationship to the other. And the relationship that you have to yourself is the foundation from which all other relationships will falter or flourish. And in the relationship to yourself, that's where we really begin to unpack what our original wound is, where our histories have led us, and what our beliefs are in terms of how we give and receive love, whether or not we trust it, how vulnerable we're able to be, how honest and expressive we have the capacity to be. And that is really where it starts, is unpacking all of that. And so it's quite a beautiful and profound journey. And what I like to remind people is that the only difference between a conventional relationship and a conscious relationship is that in the conscious relationship, we're willing to take a pause and to reflect on what we are contributing, what role we are playing in the dynamic, and to be responsible for that. Not to take responsibility for other people's behaviors or wounds or actions, but to be self reflective, to be self aware, and then to go that extra step of allowing our partner to see that as well. And so it's this invitation to deepen in maturity and personal responsibility and develop deeper emotional intelligence. And that often happens over many years or many decades of partnership. It doesn't happen just by wishing to do the work and then entering into partnership. We really have to put in the time. And that's a whole other thing that we could unpack as we go on in this conversation, because there's a lot of content out there, especially on social media, that sort of describes the kind of partner that one should choose, the kind of partner that one can attract. And while, of course, we want to be cognizant of red flags and we want to be aware of our own worth and we want to take a stand for being treated well and being honored and respected, chances are we're going to find a partner who has their own work to do, just like we do. And that work can be messy and not pretty. And we have to also make a lot of room for the messiness and the failure and the beauty of our own humanity as we figure it out together if we really want to have lasting partnerships. And in my book, I talk about that a lot, the green flags, red flags, and then just being in the body. How do we trust? So,
Wow. What steps might one take, and or how would one know that we are in a conscious relationship in general? I think, as you say, there's a lot of hype there on social media now. There's a lot of labels being thrown around. There's a lot of do this, do that. But how would one know? I mean, considering we're at so many different stages, how would one know, am I in a conscious relationship, or how do I deepen the presence or my relationship in general?
for sure. Well, sometimes I think it's really a day to day process. And there are definitely times in my own marriage where we're not behaving as though we're in a conscious relationship. My partner and I, we've been together nearing 10 years now, and we have some pretty hard times. And then we have some pretty amazing times where we wouldn't mind some cameras in the room. But I think that that's the ebb and flow of relationship. We go through seasons. Now, a hallmark of conscious relationship really is, are you both willing? Are you both committed? Do you both have a shared vision for the future? Do you both have a shared vision for how you want your relationship to look? And you don't necessarily have to have everything in common or have the same interests. That's really not necessary. Do you have the most important core values in alignment together? Do you share those things? And are you willing to repair when you have a crappy moment together? Because that's going to be the reality of long-term relationship. You're not always going to have a partner who can hold space for your fear or your emotion or your anxiety. They're not always going to say the right thing. In fact, sometimes they're going to say the absolutely wrong thing that's going to trigger you. And the conscious relationship move in that is to honor that moment as well, mutually. Can you hold that trigger for a moment, take a pause, and feel into it and understand it a little bit more and go to the root and then reveal it to your partner in a way that they are able to become a partner for you in healing, and for them to be able to see how their actions or their words or their behaviors might hurt, and then for them to have the vulnerability and the humility to work on shifting that, even though, generally speaking, the thing that we want our partner to change is going to be the most difficult thing for them to change, because we tend to attract people who are designed to trigger us by representing those unfinished business, those unhealed ghosts from the past,
Hmm.
excuse me. And so that's the paradox of relationship, is It isn't this romantic fantasy that we've made it out to be. In fact, it's actually quite difficult, and it can take a really long time to get to what we call true partnership. There are phases of relationship that we have to go to. Culturally, we tend not to make it past the power struggle. And if we do, we go into what we call the twilight zone or the dead zone. And this is where people begin to live parallel lives and they're together, but they're not really together in the depths of intimacy. And so we glamorize this honeymoon phase when we really don't know each other. There's a lot of fantasy, projection, lust. We're really interested in exploring each other on a physical level. And there's a lot of idealization happening, but we never really get to true partnership because in order to do that, you have to traverse the winters together. And that's where the true magic happens because now you're in relationship with somebody that you've been through winters with, somebody that you've been through hard times with, somebody that you've failed with over and over and over again and met each other in those depths and learned how to love each other. That is, to me, a truly conscious relationship and something that requires a lot of effort.
This is really good, and I love this. And not to play the devil's advocate, but just thinking out loud, how does one know then if we either one continue to lean in, open up our hearts, decide to stay together and continue the journey, or if it's, you would say toxic, you would say it's not going to work, there's a conflict of values. What are some of the non-negotiables when you do your coaching with, and so many millions of people around the world who are following your work? What are some of the red flags you mentioned, or the signs that are just, nope, we cannot stand for this, and or we have to either go our separate path or significantly reconsider?
For sure. Look, nobody can tell anyone other than that person themselves whether or not they should stay or go unless the dynamic is blatantly abusive. It's obviously not okay to be in a relationship with somebody who is harmful to us emotionally, physically, spiritually. We're talking verbal abuse, physical abuse. Of course, these are just hard no's, these are boundaries. Now, are you going to find a person who sometimes might put their foot in their mouth and say the wrong thing and hurt your feelings, maybe even pretty bad? I know my husband has done that many times. I've unintentionally hurt his feelings many times. And so we have to be cognizant too of not constantly searching for red flags from the mind, but also feeling for red flags in the body. And this is where that somatic piece comes in. Can you feel yourself with this person?
Mhm.
Can you actually feel what your body is doing when you're together, when you're in their presence? Does your body relax? Do you feel constantly tense? Are you bracing? Is your breath relaxed or is it fast paced or tightened? Do you feel as though you have to hold back in order to be accepted? Do you bite your tongue? Do you walk on eggshells? Or do you know that you're able to bring yourself fully to disagree, to even engage in conflict or disagreement with this person, or to share your beliefs or your feelings without it causing a major rupture in attachment? And sometimes I will say that we bring our own lack of safety into a relationship to the degree that we are so dysregulated in our nervous systems that we actually don't have the capacity to feel safe in relationship, not even because of what that partner is doing, but because our nervous system is so terrified of the perceived threat of abandonment that we're not able to relax into relationship. So again, it comes down to, can you trust yourself? Can you trust your body? Do you have the capacity to witness not only your mind, but what your body is telling you and your nervous system is telling you? And this is where doing somatic work can be really potent. Learning how to take a pause, even if it's for 3 seconds, and then you continue to practice taking a pause until it's 5, 10, then you can go 5, 10 minutes, an hour. Are you able to become a witness rather than constantly being in reaction mode? And that's when you can start to trust that you won't have to worry about missing red flags because you're feeling every moment and you're able to trust that.
It feels like so much of this will come down to the whole intuitive side of things. And I feel from having witnessing and also experiencing different kinds of relationships, sometimes we have a tendency to doubt ourselves. And the intuition is there, the body never lies. You can feel what's going on, but you don't always speak up. What are some of your tips that you have for people now who might be going through relationships? Before I ask this question, I'm reminded of a saying, and I'll paraphrase. It's something like, if you think you're enlightened sitting in lotus position for a long time, breathing, trying to be in a relationship for a long time, then that's going to be one of the greatest opportunities to heal. So let's say someone's in a relationship right now. They love the person, but they may not feel or know certainty is always going to be potentially a challenge. When does one act? And if so, how does one act to be able to come back to that coherence? Is it sitting down, having an open and honest conversation? Or are there other things first that you recommend, maybe in your book, Becoming the One, where we take that step into ourselves, but doing so in a relationship?
Is this in reference to somebody who's perhaps unsure if the relationship is something that they want to continue, or in what context?
I think moreover, that's the situation, as in, and if you ask me, I'd say, well, if you have to ask that question, observe why you're asking that question. But yeah, let's start there. If you're currently in a situation, let's say you're in a relationship, but you're not quite sure if this is working out or not. What are some of the steps that you could take to know that we either come together or remove it?
Well, look, here's a hard truth. Sometimes the people who are the best for us are going to feel the worst for us when our nervous system is dysregulated and we have an unhealed abandonment wound. It can be the safest relationships that bring up the darkest parts of ourselves because we're finally safe to feel it all. And that's a really hard one to sit with. And now I want to preface that with saying that's not across the board. This isn't to dismiss if there's true discrepancies and red flags arising in your relationship. But it is important to always weave that awareness in of self. What is your relationship to commitment? What is your relationship to staying? Do you have a runner in you? Are you in self-trust? Do you believe that you are lovable? Do you believe that somebody could actually choose you? And are you attracted to healthy love? Or is your nervous system wired to get excited and roused from chaos or avoidance or emotional unavailability or conflict? So taking it home to yourself first is really that paramount step, having that self-awareness, because if you know yourself, again, you have that self-trust, you understand your own patterns, you understand your own wiring, you understand what triggers you and what your shadow fantasy is. If you want to run away and go live in the mountains alone every time you get triggered, then you might be able to notice that when you're feeling activated in relationship. And instead of running away, you can bring your vulnerability to your partner. Now, that's the second piece. When you bring your vulnerability to your partner, when you reveal your heart, do they hold you with tenderness and care, or do they drop you? Sometimes they're probably going to drop you. That's just the truth. Speaking as somebody in a long-term relationship, you're not always going to do it right. But do they want to hold your heart with tenderness and care? And do they do their utmost best to do that? And do they try again? Do they repair? And do they really want to do that work with you? Right? Now, sometimes what you'll find is that when you bring yourself to the relationship, you bring your honesty, you bring your emotional vulnerability, they get defensive, they get triggered, they get reactive. And that's the consistent theme. There's never any glimmer of a vulnerability, responsibility, repair. If you never get that from them, you're probably not in a safe relationship. But if once in a while, both of you get defensive or one of you gets triggered and you don't say the right thing and you totally blow it, that's normal. Can you come back together and repair? That repair piece is everything when it comes to relationship.
I kind of get the feeling here, and please do tell me if I'm wrong, that you have extensive experience in ceremony in general because of the way you speak, to our connection to earth, your tonality, the way you share. How important is it to make our lives a ceremony for ourselves and also potentially in our intimate relationships?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that. I love that weaving. I do have a lot of experience being in different ceremonies, and I do feel that that's one of the things that our culture is lacking, is
Yeah.
this connection to spirit and ritual. I created a journal for my book after we published it about a year and a half later. It's called Just Becoming the One Journal. And in it, we wove in a lot of different rituals in nature and grief rituals and different altar ideas, because when we have ritual in our lives, we're actually able to complete certain cycles. We're able to fully move through an experience or a feeling and feel as though we've honored it. And so much of our culture and the way that we operate, it's really showing how blocked we are, really,
Mm.
because we're not able to move through experiences with ease and grace. There's a lot of dismissal, there's a lot of bypassing, and there's a lot of rushing to get through grief. We often even would consider grief to be depression because we just don't know how to be with it. And so when we treat each moment as a ceremony, as you say, if you're sweeping the floor or if you're ending a relationship, when you can bring reverence to that moment and see it for what it is, then doors open up and there's a witnessing that can occur and there's a holding that can happen where you feel that you're no longer alone in this. And in my work, I do weave in the elements a lot because some people don't know my story, but I grew up in and out of foster homes. I had a lot of abandonment, a lot of betrayal, a lot of abuse, a lot of addiction, chaos, you name it. So there wasn't that holding of divine love or protection from mother or father for me. I didn't have that. So what I had to do was I had to find that and create that for myself in order to mature and in order to rise into a new part of myself. For me, that's always been the elements, really finding that holding in the elements around me, in the earth mother and in fire and water. And so I invite others to do that as well, because humans are always going to let us down. And that's not that we can't let them in or trust them, but our expectations of perfection, of this divine perfection that we have for our mother and father, it's just impossible to reach because we're humans. We're fundamentally flawed. We have all sorts of character defects that we bring with us into relationship. We have our past wounds. So can we seek that safety and that wholeness within ourselves, within the elements? And that's something that I like to bring people into. And more, I'm bringing people into that in my real life too, on our land and through retreats.
I had a feeling you would say something like that, and it is quite a segue. And indeed, I wanted to weave it in because I do believe in relationships, sometimes we have gotten too rigid, and it seems like we could potentially make it more ceremonial, or at least more giving ourselves an opportunity to be together in more sacred ways rather than make
Mm.
it so exchanging and transactional. I want to talk, if I can, quickly about breakups.
Yeah.
Recently, I'm single at the moment, and I went through a breakup. And it was lovely. It was not lovely in the moment.
Yeah.
As I went through the experience, I decided not to bypass grief. I decided to sit with what was. And similar to you, I had somewhat of a rougher upbringing. And by the way, just really want to acknowledge your story for the challenges that you had growing up. And at the same time, of course, as I say, the pit drives the purpose. Here we are learning, and I
Mhm.
can sense the integrity within you practicing what you're preaching in this work. So, the painful past became part of your passion and purpose. So, thank you for
Absolutely.
doing the work and bringing us the opportunity to learn from these things.
Likewise.
Yeah, thank you. It's been, I grew up in a similar relationship. Both my parents are alcoholics, and they
Mhm.
certainly did not have a great relationship to each other, let alone themselves. And so I had the privilege of doing lots and lots of work on the abandonment wound. In fact, when I do events, I'll put, say, 500 people in the room, and we'll split the room into two or four, and we'll get them to write down their biggest fear. And it normally always comes down to not feeling good enough, not feeling loved, the fear of abandonment, and the fear of not being worthy. I wonder, when it comes to breakups, how much of that do you feel comes from that early childhood wounding, from those abandonment experiences, and maybe even from the imprint period of actually just not being held? What are your thoughts on
Mm.
how that plays out in the current relationship?
Well, I love this conversation. I'm actually writing a breakup book right now. And in that, I've really been diving back into those feelings and those core imprints and some of the spiritual truths that are illuminated through a breakup. And you're right, some of it is that core wounding. A lot of us were born And immediately, just with the cutting of the umbilical cord, there's this feeling of separation. There's the pre-verbal trauma that many of us carry that you wouldn't be able to describe because it's pre-verbal. There's the beliefs that we inherited from those first 3 years, and then that adolescent phase where that massive leap in brain development happens yet again. And most of us are experiencing chaos or dysfunction in relationship because that's all we've known. And then there's all of the times that we had our heart broken previously, both in childhood and also in all of our past relationships, that are up for review and are begging for completion when we go through a breakup. And so if you are feeling completely shattered, if you're feeling as though you can't function and it's just totally debilitating, chances are this breakup is bringing up more than just this present loss. Not to say that it's not normal to feel grief and heartache and to mourn and to cry and to have a few days where you need to stay low and close to the earth and keep it quiet. But when there is this loss of capacity and there's this panic where the nervous system is so activated that there's a sense of terror in the nervous system, which is something that happens for a lot of people when they go through a breakup, that's unfinished business. And that's oftentimes, yes, some of your past relationships, but a lot of times it's pre-verbal trauma. It's that terror sometimes can be even something like your parent went to the hospital when you were 1.5 or 2 because they needed an operation, or they went to have another baby and they came home with a sibling, and then your attachment was impacted by that. And then, of course, there's a million other stories that everyone can fill in the blank with while they're listening. Those things matter, and they do interrupt our ability to move through life and be fully in our hearts and relationship. And when we go through a breakup, there is a new opportunity because we're so open, we're so in pain that we're more attuned, we're more sensitive, and we're more willing to do whatever it takes to get out of this heartache. So I love working with people in that space. It's a really special time. Even though it's hard, I always look at that person and I think, wow, this is such a pivotal moment for you. Because when somebody's coming to me, they're sharing their story or they're reading my book or they're joining one of our live programs, I just know that that person isn't turning away. They're not turning away from themselves. They're turning toward the pain. And those are the people who are destined to discover really potent things about themselves and their soul's work and their gifts. So it can be one of the most powerful opportunities for spiritual growth as long as one faces into the pain and gets really curious about what's underneath. And honestly, sometimes it's even grieving every relationship you've ever had that you didn't let yourself truly mourn. There's so much to it.
It's exactly the way I felt because I went through this relationship breakup, breakthrough. You can
Mhm.
call it a breakup, but it's really part of the process. And I was aware of it. And also there was something happening with my son also, where that was one of the most difficult things to sit with that. And I went through the relationship and I cried and I mourned, but I was sitting with the grief and I was sitting with the sadness. And I knew that this was part of my evolution from my own loneliness away from the true me and the one that I was. And it was an amazing process of a good 2 months. And I had more tears than I've had for a very long time. And I knew that something beautiful was being born. And it just reminded me of a conversation that I had with a friend of mine, Dr. John DiMartini, not long ago, actually. And he said, it's a bit of a fantasy that people think you should have the pleasure without the pain, that the gain without the loss, and the diversity of this human experience, to sit with it and to feel it and to not be perceived as a victim within it, but to realize that this process is the cracking open of the heart. And since and going through it, I can, when I hold a room of people and I speak, I can hold the whole room in my heart in a whole new way. So I hope that that just serves. And I'd love your 2 cents worth on it for those people who are listening. When we go through these challenging moments, do you feel like these processes are there to allow us to open up our hearts more and potentially become the one? And also, how important is it to feel those things rather than bypass, as we briefly talked about before?
I mean, somebody who I really admire for this body of work is Gabor Mate. He writes so extensively about it. I mean, of course, we've also got Bessel, who wrote The Body Keeps Score. So we
Mm.
know that there's plenty of research and literature out there to serve as evidence that what we don't acknowledge still finds a way to be heard. And I work in homeopathy sometimes. I have a homeopath who I really love, and I do a lot of that for myself. That's one of my own personal therapies. And there's a remedy that some people are put on, and it's actually breast cancer tissue. So if you understand homeopathy, it's you take these, basically it's an essence, it's a plant essence, or it's the essence of, for example, you can do essence of milks, different breast milks or whatever. You can do an essence of breast cancer. And this particular homeopathic remedy is used for people who have extreme people pleasing tendencies, people who are so constantly worried about everyone else that they can't relax. They're so anxious all of the time. They can't speak up for themselves. They can't set boundaries. And so what ends up happening is that they get sick because they've prioritized everyone around them but themselves. And so it really is important that we allow ourselves to feel and process and move through whatever is arising in ourselves. Even the act of crying is powerful. We're actually healing ourselves as we cry. We're releasing all sorts of hormones and allowing our nervous system to reset. So there's no weakness in that. And that's something that ritual can really support because it creates the container. And now, not everybody's going to do an elaborate ritual, but a really simple one, you could just take yourself on a walk and sit down with a tree and write a letter to whoever you want to write your letter to. And then you can put it on your altar, or you can burn it, or you can bury it when you feel ready. You could sit at a fire and you could take a piece of plant, or you could take a leaf or some type of smudging material, and you can say a prayer for yourself and you can throw it in the fire. There are really simple rituals that you can do that serve to remind your soul that you are here for a reason and that you're going to be okay. I used to have a spiritual teacher, and he would always say, the only purpose of conscious relationship is to confirm you as whole and complete,
Hmm.
meaning that any partner you're with, they're not your other half. They're just there to confirm that you're whole.
Oh, this is the segue to becoming the one. So I think this is really, really important to have this conversation, because I think a lot of people, they try to fill a void within themselves by being with someone else. They may not be integrated in love for themselves, and so they seek love from the outside. They may not feel like they're worthy enough, so they often will call in the opposite partner to show them that aspect of themselves. Can you tell us about, there's a lot of titles. I love that you chose this title of Becoming the One. What is the essence of this message, of this book of yours?
You've likely heard of the twin flame concept, which is this idea that there is this one out there who is the other part of your soul, that your soul broke in half, and that in order to complete and heal your karma, that you need to find this person and then do the deep work with them. Now, often these are the most chaotic, dysfunctional relationships, and we use this twin flame concept as a way to justify staying in it. And I've heard people say, well, if I don't complete it with them, then I'll just have to redo it in the next life. I'm here to say there's nobody on this planet that can complete you. You were born whole. You were born perfect. You are already the one. And the one for you is going to be whoever you decide you want to do the work with along the way. It's going to be the person who inspires you to be your best self, who you feel that balance of chemistry and attraction and also friendship and deep connection and safety with. And in my work, in my book, the foundation is becoming the one, returning to your own wholeness, coming home to yourself, recognizing that the relationship you have with you is going to set the tone for the kind of work you have to do in your future relationships. That doesn't mean heal and be perfect before you attract a partner, but there needs to be a certain level of self-awareness and a certain level of self-esteem, certainly, in order to attract a partner who will treat you the way that you deserve to be treated. If you don't believe that you're worthy of being treated well, then you could end up in a relationship with somebody that you didn't even really consciously choose. This is just a person that you fell into relationship with, rather than taking your time to explore and get to know each other on a deeper level before making such a big commitment. And so the work takes them through understanding what a conscious relationship really looks like, what are their own core wounds, what's your relationship to your mother and father, what are your values, and what values have been leading all of your relationship patterns up until now. Do you know what your own shadow is and what your role is in relationship that's contributing to the cyclical chaos that you might be in? And as we move deeper through the book, we get to a point where they get to craft their own love map, their own vision for what kind of relationship they want in the future with a deeper sense of self-awareness. And so it's a lot more authentic when we get to that place.
When we say becoming the one, in becoming the one, how much of the aspect of becoming the one do you feel is relevant when it comes to relationships? As in, what work, not necessarily we need to do, because I understand everyone has a unique expression, but if we talk about becoming the one, what are the
Mhm.
steps in becoming the one so that we can get ourselves right and, of course, give the most amount of love to our relationships, but also know that we're not going to be fulfilling or completing a void by looking outside of ourselves? What are the steps to becoming the one?
Well, I don't have like a two-step formula or anything like that, but my book does have many, many different steps. I would say that if I had to break it down and bring you to the very first step, it would be returning to your body. And it would be
Hmm.
actually allowing your nervous system and your heart to communicate with you rather than living in the head, and having that alignment between head and heart. Having, like we talked about in the very beginning, that self-trust piece. Do I trust myself? That has to be the fundamental question that we carry with us through every interaction that we have. Because if you trust yourself, then there's really no other question. You can trust when your body says yes, or when your body says no, or when your body says, hey, there's a boundary here that needs to be spoken, or there's an inquiry here that I need to make, or there's a line that I need to draw, or there's a vulnerability that I actually need to share. You can start to recognize when your own stuff is coming up and interrupting the harmony and the peace, and have the humility to bring that into the space of conscious relationship. So, being in your body and actually trusting what's arising because you've done the work to heal your nervous system, that is the first step. And I recommend doing somatic work a lot. I bring people into containers in my work with somatic experiencing practitioners very frequently. We have them who work on our team because it's just so powerful for helping people heal the unspoken. And you don't have to know your history. You don't have to remember what's wrong or what happened to you. You don't have to dredge it all up. You just need to teach your nervous system what it feels like to respond a new way, what it feels like to be secure. And so I'm sure everybody at this point has heard of attachment styles because they're so trendy. There's what's called earned secure attachment. Earned secure attachment is when you move from one attachment style to secure through putting in the work. And this is done really effectively through somatic work because it really is that relationship to the nervous system. If the nervous system's constantly on high alert, then you can't really change. You can't think your way out of a pattern. You have to allow your body to feel your way through that healing.
This is so important. The body keeps a score. There's so many ways that we could discuss this, but being in the body, I think, is really, really important. For me, I always say the body never lies, the body never makes a mistake. Be in the body, sense what's going on. You could even expand the intuition into how do I feel in this interaction with this individual. Very special.
Mm.
Okay, so before we aim to wrap up, I've got a couple of more questions, if I may. And the next one I'd like to ask is what I believe is the most underrated, probably, if not, and don't want to put too much out there, the most important relationship, which I had a tainted relationship with a long time. So I grew up, and I would say my mother was somewhat spiritual, and my father was beaten very badly when he grew up, and his mother,
Mhm.
my grandmother, was Christian. So he had a horrible relationship because he was beaten in the name of Christ, tainted,
Mhm.
unfortunately. And as I grew up, I was quite disconnected from spirit. I was not really having a conscious conversation with my creator. And as I started
Yeah.
to remember, I started to attune. I realized that I said there's three levels of relationships. One is egocentric, me. Two is conditional. I'll do this for you if you do this for me. And three is, how can I serve you? I love you so much. And I reckon I was in a level one relationship with the creator, as in I would only have a conversation with God, with whatever you want to call it, spirit, a great spirit, you can call it whatever. People have different names for this divine essence. I would only have a conversation when I was in pain, when I was in suffering, and I would often say, "Please help me with this because," and or sometimes I would even blame. And then I realized that I was simply a vessel, that I was an opportunity to share love and to give and receive love. But there was something much greater than me at play, an intelligence that was divine, that was beyond space and time. And so this is, of course, me projecting some of my beliefs, but I'd love to hear about your belief and also potentially what you've seen and what you recommend in your book, Becoming the One, when it comes to potentially one of the most important relationships, which is the relationship to spirit, the relationship to our creator. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I love that. And thanks for sharing. It's such a personal relationship to spirit or to a higher power or to what some people will call God. And I'm not a religious person, it's not part of my ethos. I'm deeply spiritual. I feel very connected to the elements. I feel very held and protected. The word God doesn't scare me because I don't see it as this judge in the sky. It's God is in everyone and everything and every plant, every animal. For me, it's very important. For some people, it might not be that important, right? I can't tell other people this is going to be the most important relationship for you. Has it been paramount for me? Absolutely, especially for those of us who have grown up feeling alone or grown up feeling like abandoned, dropped, not cared for by our human kin, our caretakers who were supposed to be there for us. It can be very healing for those who feel drawn to work in this way, in a more nature connected way, to have that divine connection through nature or through spirit. Not everybody wants that. But for me, it's been really important. And for me, I also tell people it depends on what you really need in a relationship. I know that personally, I couldn't be in relationship with somebody who didn't have that dynamic spiritual edge, somebody who was not a seeker in their own way. My husband seeks in a different way than I do often. Sometimes even way more devoted than I am in his own realms. It's very solar the way that he pursues his spiritual path. And so for me it's very important. For other people that might not be the main core value. I do think that it's worthwhile for everyone to explore. And something that I like to do in some of my containers is just have a few sessions, if it's a 6 or 8 week program, just have a few sessions exploring what their earliest childhood memories are of being in nature and recalling those memories. And how did you feel held in those moments? And did you have this sense that you weren't completely alone? And sometimes that opens a door for people to feel that connection once again, because as children, it's innate and then we lose it. And so I like to return us back there from time to time.
Beautiful answer. And I love how it's non-dogmatic in any way, shape, or form. I'm not religious either, but to have a connection to something, to that intelligence that is within us and all around us. And it, as you mentioned, it could be to Pachamama, it could be to the elements, and in many ways, I do similar practices as well through my own experience with being in sacred ceremonies and tradition for many years. It's been very instrumental learning to reconnect again, even with the elements, as you mentioned. So before I ask you the last question, I just want to give our listeners and viewers an opportunity, because I think a lot of people now, 65% of our community are women. They are tuned in. They want to learn, they want to grow, they want to heal, they want to expand, they want to explore. So I'd love to give them an opportunity. So just mentioning, and you may add to this, if you want to learn more about this amazing work, it's Rising Woman on Instagram. So that's Rising Woman on Instagram, and it's Rising Woman Official on Facebook, and also Rising Woman on YouTube. Apart from that, where does one go, which I would highly recommend, to get your book, please?
So my book is currently available on Amazon, of course, in most major bookstores, in a lot of independent bookstores. It's been translated into 18 or 19 languages. So chances are, wherever you're tuning in from, you'll be able to find it. And you can always send an email to my team through my website if, for example, you're looking for a link to it and you just can't find it. And it will continue to be published in more and more languages. I'm really excited every time I receive a copy from a different country. It's in Chinese and Korean, it's in Dutch, and it's really special to have my work reaching so far and wide. So thank you for directing people to my book. And I really do feel honored when people have the chance to read my book and to share their experiences with it.
Very special. And if you're listening, watching, tuning into this, and if you felt what I felt, this is not just an intellectual conversation. This is a conversation where we can be deep within our bodies. We can be present with each other. We can be open hearted, and we can talk at a level that I think is really important. And you're really integrated in your message, I can tell. So I just want to acknowledge the work that you've done and what you share with people. And it's not just for rising women. There are also important aspects, very important aspects in this for men in terms of us finding and connecting with ourselves, becoming the one for ourselves, connecting with the divine feminine within ourselves. I think this is a part for me, certainly, that I neglected for a long time. I was compensating in overly too much in the masculine because I was afraid, and I was afraid to get my heart broken. I was afraid to be abandoned. And so I would break up before I got broken up with, and the list goes on and on. But it's very special what you have to share with us. I really want to thank you for your time. And if this has been useful for listeners and viewers, listen to it again. Share it with as many people as you can, because you never know. You can share it with one individual and they might go, wow, this is meaningful. This touched my heart. I felt this good in my body. And so they continue the journey and go on this beautiful healing path. So if I may, please, I've got one last question for you straight off the cuff.
Please do.
Okay, wonderful. So here's the question. I want you now to imagine that you are on the world stage. Every sentient being alive has gathered, watching, listening, and then tuning in to your message. Take a breath. Whenever you're ready, please do share. What is your message to the world right now?
Wow, you really had to bring the biggest question ever. I love that. Keep your heart open and see the innocence in everyone.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And so it is really special. I feel that. Thank you so much. You guys know where to go. Click the link, have a look, have a listen, and get that book and read that book. I think that'll be wonderful for us all to step into that next journey of becoming the one. Thank you so much for your time, Shay. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.